Hello, Winnemucca Wolves! Alright, so we are doing Chapter 3 of the Zodiac Legacy. Book 1, The Convergence by Stan Lee, among others. Chapter 3. Now, if you remember where we left off, Stephen is down under the museum in a weird world where Maxwell is getting a bunch of powers. We don't know why yet. The first power he got was of the horse. Okay. Chapter 3. Stephen stood for a long moment, almost paralyzed. He struggled to collect his thoughts, to make sense of what he had just seen. I could bounce, he thought. The door's right behind me. I could bolt back up the stairs and get back to the class, make up some lame excuse about getting lost. It'd be like this never happened. I bet after a while I'd even think I made it all up in my head. But there was still Jumani, the tour guide, or whatever she was. And more than that, there was a mystery here, something very important, something that might even affect the future of the world? Something a hero would investigate. Maxwell raised his head slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. "Carlos," he said, "position 5. "Sir," the female technician said. "Are you sure?" Maxwell glared at her. When he bared his teeth, a bit of green energy leaked out. The woman stepped back, frightened. "Maxwell," Carlos said, "the Zodiac power, it's not meant to be held by a single person, especially someone who is not the appropriate sign." "You're not a horse," the woman cried. That, Stephen thought, is a strange thing to say. Carlos swept an arm around to indicate the pools on the ground. "You absorbed 3 of the 12 Zodiac signs," he said. "The rest could kill you." "They would kill a person like you. They will make me the most powerful man on Earth." There was silence for a moment. Carlos's gaze flicked briefly down to the ground below the stage. "Position 5, Maxwell repeated. Carlos nodded. He turned back to his work, issuing a series of low commands to the other techs. Above, the Chpt began to grind once again. A second light flared to life on its underside, blazing down toward another pool. Maxwell sucked in a deep breath. He glided around the room, moving one space counterclockwise to the open, newly lit pool. He slipped easily into the spotlight from the Chpt, moving, in the process, one position closer to Stephen's hiding place on the dark catwalk at the edge of the room. Again, Stephen saw movement down below. He leaned over the edge of the catwalk, conscious of the drop to the ground. It was the woman, Jermaine. Still hugging the shadows, she moved swiftly, gracefully, and her hair was pulled up now into a ponytail. Jermaine crept toward Maxwell. Both of them were converging on Stephen's position, but neither of them seemed to have noticed him yet. "I should run," Stephen thought once more, but he couldn't. Something held him rooted to that spot. "I've got to see this through to the end, whatever this is." Maxwell took up position above the newly illuminated pool, just as he had with the previous one. "Begin," he said. Again, the Chpt in the ceiling glowed bright. Again, the pool surged upward, meeting the blinding light from above in a flare of power. And again, Maxwell screamed. Stephen glanced down at the corner of the room. He could see Jumani crouched behind another pool, the next one over. "She's using that pool to hide from Maxwell," Stephen realized, and she was pulling something out of a pack, casting nervous glances up at the pulsing column of light. Maxwell's head whipped back and forth in the air, flinging drops of the strange green fluid all around. This time, his howl of agony sounded more like a hissing sound. The coiled form of a snake surged into being above him, its scaly head and sharp tongue hissing back and forth in time to Maxwell's own movements. Stephen stared. The motion was mesmerizing, like the rhythmic motions of a hypnotist's watch. The snake's head seemed to turn toward him, its deep red eyes boring into his mind. Then, once again, the energy faded away. Stephen shook his head, still still trapped by the snake's hypnotic spell. And then, with a sinking feeling, he realized that Maxwell was staring straight at him. Slowly, Maxwell twisted the handle controls of his hover device. He glided across the room, unhurried, keeping his eyes fixed on Stephen. Green radiance leaked from his body, emanating from his face, his clothes, his very pores. He stopped just beyond the edge of the catwalk, hovering in midair, his eyes precisely level with Stephen's. And then he smiled. "Look what's wandered in out of the wild," Maxwell said. "A young tiger." He sounded as if he'd just caught something for dinner. But suddenly, Stephen remembered something. "Grandfather used to call me my little tiger. Is that an astrology thing? Something about the year I was born?" And then he understood. The horse, the snake, the pools, 12 of them. 12 signs, just like on Grandfather's compass. He glanced up at the heavily marked disc in the ceiling, then found his gaze drawn back irresistibly to Maxwell's probing eyes. "The Zodiac?" Stephen said. "Those are signs." Maxwell's smile stayed fixed. He nodded. Below, Stephen could see activity on the control stage. Carlos pointed, and the 2 other techs climbed down and started off across the floor, towards Stephen and Maxwell. "You're clever," Maxwell said. "How did you get in here?" Stephen still couldn't move. "The door?" he said, trying to sound a little more confident. Maxwell turned back toward the stage. "I ordered the convergence chamber sealed." "It was," Carlos replied, but his voice trembled. The 2 other techs were running toward the catwalk now, swerving around the pools. "I already have a tiger," Maxwell said, turning back toward Stephen. "Unless you think you're a better choice." Stephen shrugged. He felt like he was watching a foreign film. Abruptly, Maxwell ripped sideways in midair and swooped away, without looking back. He gestured at the 2 techs. "Maria, Fedor," Maxwell said. "Remove him. We can't have him interfering with the convergence." Then he stopped for a few feet from the stage and tilted his head back toward Stephen. But hold him. I'd like to continue this little chat later." The techs were climbing a small ladder now, a few yards down the catwalk from Stephen. They'd be on him in a minute. He looked around frantically. Maxwell had stopped just above the central stage, leaning down to argue with Carlos. Their voices were low. Stephen couldn't make out what he was saying, but Carlos didn't look happy. Above, the Chpt glowed softly. Hang on, guys. My allergies are crazy, even with allergy medicine. Okay. Above, the Chpt glowed softly. The first of the techs, Fedor, the man, climbed up onto the catwalk. He looked a little unsure of himself. Probably not used to doing guard duty, Stephen thought. Still, Stephen wasn't sure he could take 2 of them in a fight, but he really didn't want to chat with Maxwell anymore. Another motion caught his eye, just below. The woman from the museum, Chpt. He couldn't see her clearly, but it had to be her. He glanced quickly back at the 2 technicians advancing on him across the catwalk, and then he leapt over the edge. He dropped through the air into darkness, landing roughly on the bare ground. He dropped to his knees and tumbled onto his back. When he looked up, the woman from the museum was just a few feet away, barely visible in the diffuse of light from the pools. She was staring at a pair of round metal objects in her hand. Each was about the size of a baseball, and each had a blinking red light on the surface. "Come on," she whispered, apparently to the metal spheres. Come on, come on! Stephen glanced back up at the catwalk. The 2 technicians leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness. They didn't seem to be able to see Stephen, but then the female tech, Maria, pointed at the winking red lights in Jumani's hand. Stephen took a step toward the mysterious woman. Hi, he said. Are you? Without looking up, Jumani swung her empty hand around and clamped it down hard over Stephen's mouth. Keep quiet, and I can get you out, she said, keeping her voice low. Just do everything I say, exactly when I say it. She took one of the spherical objects as if it were a broken remote control. Come on! What? Stephen stared at the glowing figure above them and swallowed in fear. What is all this? A blinding light washed over them. For a moment, Stephen thought it was another power of light from the Chpt disc in the ceiling. But when he squinted upward, he saw the hovering form of Maxwell, shining a small arc light mounted on his hover vehicle. Maxwell cast an amused glance at Stephen. Then he turned to Jumani, and his expression turned dark. "Jasmine," he said. Stephen turned around. The two technicians were climbing down off the ladder again, pointing and heading straight for Stephen and Jumani. Or Jasmine, he thought. Whatever her name is. Jasmine looked back up at Maxwell, shading her eyes against the glare. "I was hurt, Maxwell." "Oh, I was hurt, Maxwell," she said, her mouth curling into a nasty smile. "I'm not on your guest list anymore." "It's a private party, Jasmine," Maxwell replied. "I get it, Glass Ceiling. Hold this for me, kid." Without looking, she tossed one of the metal spheres at Stephen. He fumbled, but managed to catch it. When he looked up, Jasmine was already in motion. She tossed her sphere up high, barely watching, as it followed a lazy arc through the air. Then she leapt forward, aiming a fierce kick at Fedor, the male technician. Her foot struck him square in the stomach, doubling him over. The female tech, Maria, waved a taser at her, electricity arcing at its tip. Jasmine chopped sideways into Maria's wrist. The tech cried out in pain, and the taser fell, sparking to the ground. Jasmine followed up with a brutal elbow to the back of the woman's head. Maria grunted and went down. Fedor struggled to rise, but Jasmine took him down with two fierce blows to his solar plexus. Then she held out a hand, just in time to catch the sphere she'd thrown up into the air. Its light, Stephen noticed, was still red. He glanced down at the one in his hands, and it was blinking red too. Then Jasmine marched back toward Stephen, taking long strides. "Kid," she said, shaking her head, "you're killing me here." She's barely winded, Stephen thought. Who is this woman? But before Jasmine could reach Stephen, Maxwell's spotlight shone back down on her. "Very impressive, Jasmine." Green energy radiated once more from Maxwell's hovering form. "But time is short, and I can't let you stay here. Carlos, please." A loud, grinding noise cut him off. Stephen looked up, knowing what he'd see. The Chpt. The disc in the ceiling was glowing. The third light blazed to life, and the disc began its loud, slow, circular movement once again. Maxwell whirled around in midair. "Carlos," he called, "what are you doing?" "Jazz!" Carlos yelled, leaning over the edge of the stage. "Now!" Jasmine looked down just as the light turned green on the metal sphere in her hand. She smiled and threw the sphere in the air. "Game on," she said. Maxwell wobbled in midair, dodging the sphere, but he wasn't her target. The sphere sailed past him and struck the Chpt near its center. On impact, the sphere released an electrical charge, sending sparks dancing across the surface of the giant compass. The Chpt ground even louder, and its light dimmed momentarily. Jasmine looked up in the air. "Oh, so," Maxwell said. Maxwell had turned to stare at Carlos. "A traitor at the very heart of my..." Jasmine leapt up in the air surprisingly high and expertly checked Maxwell with the left side of her body. His hover vehicle whined in protest, tipped perilously to the side. He managed to find his balance and whirled around, lashing out at her. But she ducked, standing her ground. This is a good picture of Jasmine kicking his booty. So that's Jasmine and Maxwell. Then, shockingly, Maxwell laughed. "Impressive," he said, "and yet so disappointing." Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. "That's what my mother used to say," she said, reaching out to grab Maxwell by the shoulders. "Remember her?" "Oh, yes." Above, the Chpt ground to a halt. Its light was steady again, shining down on yet another pool. The pool seemed to glow in response. Taking advantage of Maxwell's momentary distraction, Jasmine jumped behind Maxwell and climbed onto his back, grappling with him like a wrestler. She shifted her weight and the hover vehicle lurched through the air. She seemed to be steering Maxwell, forcing their combined flight into a particular direction. "Why are you doing this, Jasmine?" Maxwell asked. "You're like me, a dragon. We're stronger than all of them." Then Stephen realized where Jasmine was leading Maxwell, toward the glowing pool beneath the shining light of the Chpt. "We answer to no one," Maxwell added. "I answer to my conscience," Jasmine replied. "Ever heard of that?" Jasmine climbed higher up Maxwell's back. She placed a foot on Maxwell's shoulder, bracing herself. She's going to leap, Stephen realized. She's going to jump into the pool or into the light. But Maxwell grabbed her leg in a firm grip. "Oh no," he said, his expression deadly. "Never, little girl, never." Then Maxwell stopped and glanced upward. He turned in alarm, looking first down at Stephen, then over toward Carlos, just as the brightness, widest beam of all, stabbed down, engulfing both Jasmine and Maxwell in a thick cylinder of light. A matching surge of liquid splashed upward from the pool. The hover vehicle sparked, shorted out, and fell to the ground with a clatter. Even without the vehicle, Jasmine and Maxwell hung suspended in the air. They cried out together and rose up higher, held in a cocoon of sparkling, eldritch power. Stephen shielded his eyes, struggling to see. Maxwell and Jasmine were barely visible as silhouettes, jerking back and forth like puppets, suspended halfway between the Chpt and the ground. As the energy beam held them, an animal figure began to form above their bodies, just as it had with Maxwell before. But this figure was different. Forms, as if two different forms were fighting to occupy the same space. One figure was lean and sinewy, like a snake, but with sharp, searching claws and a strange mustache-like growth above its gaping jaws. The other was also reptilian, but with sharply angled bat wings that stretched out wide. The creature flickered and shifted, morphing rapidly from one form to another. It opened its jaws and screamed, a piercing sound like nothing Stephen had ever heard before. And that's where we'll stop till tomorrow. Love you guys. Bye.